as these problems have been taken. Hello, my name is Tim Lynch. I am your host on Legal Lines. Legal Lines is brought to you by the Massachusetts LGBTQ Bar Association. This is a momentous day. One of the primary goals of the LGBTQ Bar Association has been the passage of the Transgender Rights Bill. That bill passed the State House of Representatives last night, and only a few hours ago, by a voice vote, passed the state Senate. The governor has indicated many, many times he will sign the bill. So this is a momentous day, a day we're very proud of. This takes place in the context of Transgender Awareness Week, which is November 12th through the 20th. And November 20th is Transgender Remembrance Day. With me here today is a fellow board member on the Massachusetts LGBTQ Bar Association and a good friend of mine, Alex Coleman. Alex, how are you?
I'm excited.
Good. And I should say that you've been involved in this for quite some time?
My whole life, probably, yes. Yes, from the onset. And although the bill that was passed, I mean, it's a huge step forward. This is the third session it's been introduced, and we're really glad to have gotten the bill as it was modified passed. Unfortunately, to get the passage, we had to take out public accommodations protection. That having been said, we're going to have public accommodations protections. It's just a question of when.
Just a question of time. Well, first of all, let's back up a little bit for our audience and just talk about in general terms. What does transgender mean?
Transgender is an umbrella term, and basically everybody has a sense of themselves as somewhere as a man, a woman, somewhere in a mix of that, and transgender basically refers to people who don't fit neatly into the binary man, woman, or they fit but not into the way their bodies, other people would ascribe a gender to them. So it's not just transsexuals who, the catchphrase has been, I'm born in a man's body, but I feel as I'm a woman, or vice versa. But people are aware that there are gradations of gender. And so, but the people who this affects are some of the most discriminated against people that currently have been, when you still can be the butt of a joke without getting into trouble, that's transgender people.
And that's always a sign of trouble when one group of people can be the butt of a joke and everybody laughs or something like that.
And just because of who they are.
There was a fact given out that 76% of transgender people in Massachusetts have experienced harassment or mistreatment on the job.
Yes.
That's shocking.
It's shocking. And yet, when you think about it, and those are just the ones that people report, right? And so that's the one side of it. That there's been a tremendous amount of harassment, people getting fired, people not being able to get jobs, even in a good economy. And the flip side is that in the process of promoting the Transgender Equality Act, a lot of trans people who look different, and some of us who don't look so different, have stood up, have been open about who we are, have met with our legislators, have talked with our families, our employers, our friends, and said, look, I'm a human being too. I'm entitled to the same protections as everyone else, and this is why I need them. These are my life experiences that that have impacted me in so many ways, and I want to be a contributing member of this society, and these lack of protections are getting in the way of my being able to do that. It's particularly critical, I think, given that it gives hope, especially to younger people, that they can have a life. And I mean that literally, because the Trans Day of Remembrance actually began here in Boston, about, I believe it was 12 years ago, when Rita Hester, who was a trans woman, was brutally murdered in the Alston area. And it was one of those Stonewall kind of enough is enough moments, and the community had rallied around that. And it's become an international event. Unfortunately, it's commemorating people who have died, whether by other people brutally, and oftentimes those assaults and murders are some of the most horrific in terms of how they're carried out. And people who just couldn't handle the discrimination and how difficult it was, and basically took their own lives, but with a lot of help. And in the last number of years, it's really amazing to see how it's grown in terms of, from a small group of people to it being a much huge. I mean, there were a number of people from the Mass Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender, and Queer Bar Association, so for our viewers who can know exactly what those alphabet letters stand for, who attended. And it was an opportunity for people to hear from people in the community about what was going on, about the legislation, about other things, people to talk about their experiences, and then an open forum for people to discuss whatever they wanted, or to read poetry or performance art, followed by a vigil. And it's a very moving vigil, because what it basically does is that it's outside the State House, and people read out the names of people who have died.
This is the Day of Remembrance?
The Day of Remembrance. So
this year it's the 20th.
It's every year, I believe, it's the 20th. And this year it's going to be at the 20th, this coming Sunday. 4 o'clock it starts. It's at the, help me out here, the
St. Paul's Cathedral.
St. Paul's Cathedral across from Park Street Church. Park Street Station.
T-Station.
T-Station. And everybody's welcome. It's not a trans-only event. Allies are more than welcome. It should be mostly very celebratory in terms of the legislation, and yet somber event because of recognizing that we've lost a lot of people.
You've been watching Legal Lines. Legal Lines is brought to you by the Massachusetts LGBTQ Bar Association. My guest today is Alex Coleman. We're talking about the passage of the Transgender Legal Rights Bill through the State House. If you'd like to call in, I invite you to do so. Our number here is 617-708-3290. Again, 617-708-3290. Getting back to the legislation, it obviously outlaws discrimination with respect to certain things, but not accommodations. What does it outlaw?
Basically, it adds gender identity and expression to already existing anti-discrimination legislation in Massachusetts in the areas of housing, which is critical, employment, which is critical, public education. The amount of bullying and torment that students go through is, even if you're not transgender, but particularly if you present in any kind of different way. And so public education and credit. And it also adds gender identity and expression to the hate crimes legislation. So if I get beat up, clearly just because I'm transgender, it would be a hate crime.
Okay. So basically, it's what we understand, like racial discrimination and things of that nature in the employment setting, the housing setting. These laws have been in effect in many of our communities already. through ordinances like Boston, Cambridge.
Right, and it's important that you bring it up because if I can,
Please.
In Boston, there has been a citywide ordinance that included non-discrimination based on gender identity or expression since 2002. I want to say that again, 2002. And that includes, in the non-discrimination, public accommodations. So the brouhaha about how this is going to be dangerous or people will pose as imposters. I mean, so whenever people are discriminating, or whatever the group is, it's always about the bathrooms or whatever.
Always, yeah.
But in this situation, the Suffolk County District Attorney, Dan Conley, his letter of support, strong support for the passage of the Trans Equality Act, which, with inclusion of public accommodations, he indicated that there were no problems. Have you heard? I mean, this has been in Boston. This is Fenway Park. This is whatever we call the Garden these days. And it's also,
TD Bank, no.
right, all the restaurants. It's a non-issue. But when people say something's an issue and evoke fear, so what we need to do is more public education and for people to continue doing what's been happening. And I think when people have more rights, they can be more visible. And as people are more visible, it breaks down the barriers. And I think that's what's going to happen. But what happened today is very momentous.
Yeah.
We're not at the forefront of this. I mean, there are 15 states that already have anti-discrimination laws for transgender people. So we're
a little way coming to the table.
Right.
But it's important we get there. You also mentioned the hates crime, that gender identity was added to the hates crime. By way of background, the hates crime is if somebody, you were mentioning, if you were attacked because you're transgender, that would be a hate crime. And basically what that does is it enhances the potential sentence on the offender.
Right.
And that's because it's in many ways an enhanced crime.
Well, it's because it's not only on the victim. It's on the victim, it's on the community. And it also sends a message that, I mean, it's wrong when you beat up anybody.
Yes.
Yeah. But if you're beating up a person just because who they are, that it's a way of saying, look, this is totally unacceptable.
And the fact of the matter is, if you're beaten up for your wallet or something like that, you can take precautions against that. But if you're beaten up because of who you are and how you present yourself, you really can't do anything about that. So it's in many ways it's an enhanced crime, and therefore it's an enhanced sentence is justifiable.
Right. And I think another thing that's really important about the increased visibility and protections that trans people will now have is that there are a lot of people who may not identify as being transgender, but whose presentation in the world may not be so conforming to expectations. And this would provide protections for them as well. And I think that everybody, we're not so other that everybody can think of ways in which maybe they don't, either by their behavior or their appearance or their interests or their role, don't neatly fit into a gender category or all the time. And by thinking about the way or knowing how it feels when you don't feel you're fitting well enough to how you might want to or how other people expect you to, it gives us a little sense of how it is for trans people. But and also, especially in the public education, the younger grades, most of the bullying that is presumably based on, oh, well, a person being gay or lesbian.
Or perceived.
It's really perception. And the perception, typically, especially with younger people, is based on their gender presentation, which may or may not say anything about their sexual orientation in reality, but that so it's the perception of nonconformity of gender that people then move to the next step and make a presumption, sometimes correctly, sometimes incorrectly, about sexual orientation. Sexual orientation being who one is attracted to in an intimate.
You've been watching Legal Lines. Legal Lines is brought to you by the Massachusetts LGBTQ Bar Association. My guest here today is Alex Coleman. Our number here is 617-708-3290. Alex,
can I just talk about the coalition a little bit?
Oh, please do.
Because this is not just like one group. This has been a coalition of many, many, many quite diverse groups, and I can't even begin to name all of them, but
that came together in support of this.
They came together in support of this. And they often include people who wouldn't ordinarily be working together necessarily. So, for example, there are people who are firefighters from a suburb. There are people who are living on the streets. There are attorneys. There are people from progressive organizations. There are people from not so progressive organizations. There are educators. And it's been a very expansive and increasingly expansive group that's really worked together to help not only pass the legislation, propose the legislation, but also to do the work of spreading truths about who transgender people are, what the impact of this legislation can be. And it's really can be not only life-saving, but also very good for the economy.
Yeah.
Because there was a study from the Williams Institute that showed that the Commonwealth is probably losing millions of dollars because of the impact of housing discrimination, employment discrimination, et cetera, against transgender people.
I remember reading a study that showed that the economy does better where there is more acceptance. In that particular study, it was of gay rights, and you know, the idea was people are more comfortable living in an environment where people are safe.
Right.
But let's touch upon public accommodations, which was excluded from the bill. What exactly is meant by public accommodations, and how does it impact the community?
Yeah. Well, public accommodations is really a very expansive term. It means any place that's publicly offered for somebody to come in and utilize. So, for example, a restaurant, public transportation, a hotel, a store, a retail store, a beach. Anything that's a public, you can buy your ticket, walk in a movie theater, is a public accommodation. And so people still can just get kicked out because of their presenting in a way that's gender nonconforming.
So if you were to go out of this building and
Right.
go to a restaurant across the street or something, they have the right to kick you out for no other reason other than that you're transgender.
Right. Now there are some, again, we're in Boston, so there is some protection. There is also some protection under some of the rulings from the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination. However, they're not necessarily binding. And it also makes it harder for the people who run these establishments to know what they can and can't do. And so one of the things that another member of our association who works with employers, during her testimony before in support of the legislation before the Judiciary Committee, emphasized that her clients would like clarity about.
That's Kathy?
Yes, Kathy Rubin.
Oh, she's
right.
awesome. She's going to be on the January show to go over
she's
that.
really good.
She's awesome.
And and she was very convincing to me because she said that the Massachusetts Bar Association, which is a huge bar association, has different sections based on area of practice, including employment law, which includes employers and labor. And they passed the recommendation to support this legislation unanimously. So if both sides
both sides who typically are at war with
Right.
each other and fighting each other, both sides agree.
And a lot of the companies and colleges, but big corporations, including many law firms now, have recognized that by being more accepting and hiring a more diverse population, they have access to more talent. And that, is it easy for a trans person to work at a big law firm? One would hope so, but probably not really. But there are situations where it has worked that way. And I think that the more one has exposure to that, as a colleague or as a supervisor or as a client, that it will get even easier. But the companies recognize it's good for business.
Yeah.
And so if there was, it's not bad for business.
It's very good for business.
It's good for business.
Again, we get back to not only everybody feels more comfortable, there's more tolerance of each other and our differences, but it's just a more welcoming environment.
Right. And when you can be yourself, you can be much more effective.
Yeah.
Because you're not always worrying about all these other things, only some of the time.
But we touched upon, this is Transgender Awareness Week. How long have we been having Transgender Awareness Week?
Well, not as long as we've been having this Transgender Day of Remembrance, but I think as people have been willing to be more visible, there's been much more expansion because there's been more interest, there have been more resources. In fact, I went to see a documentary called Cruel and Unusual, which was at the AIDS Action Committee's new offices, not far from here actually. And it was sponsored by Transgender, which was a group that works out of a number of places working with people around HIV and a variety of issues. And this particular documentary was very compelling. It was about the experiences of several trans women who are incarcerated and the treatment and the issues that they were confronted with. And so that's another area where actually there have been a lot of ways in which the Massachusetts Transgender Political Coalition have worked with local police in Boston, in the prisons around, and there's a lot of work still to be done, but it's starting to happen. And I think that this legislation will help people who wanted to move in this direction have the support to do it because they're obligated to now.
They're obligated. Thank you to people like you who've been out there for a long time. Put yourself out there. Put yourself at risk, quite frankly. And now it's snowballing, where people are more and more accepting. More and more people come out, and everybody knows somebody in their family or one of their friends who happens to be transgender or expresses their gender differently. And once people realize that, then it's a better environment.
Well, when Chaz Bono can be on Dancing with the Stars, I mean, it's sort of a statement of where things are. But it's not about him. I mean, it is about him, but it's really about where things have gotten to. And it's not just the sensationalism. When I first transitioned, there was a whole uproar. This was over 18 years ago. And it was, people didn't know anybody. Yeah. But when you get to know people,
you become less afraid.
Much less afraid.
You're more understanding, and you see each other's humanity.
Right. And then hopefully people respond to us based on our strengths and weaknesses as opposed to who we are, which is only fair.
Which is only fair, which is only American.
Right. So it really is, and I also want to say that it really has taken a lot of people working together on this, and that the political leadership and the courageousness of some of the sponsors, Carl Shortino, Byron Rushing, Ben Dowling, and there are many, many others who have taken a positive, supportive stand, and many, many more people who, in hearing stories from their constituents about their real-life experiences, have come to understand that this isn't just some hotbed issue. I mean, this is about real people and real lives, and have really, moved along on it. And so I think that as disappointed as I am, the public accommodations is not included. I know it will be.
Eventually.
And I think that what we've done today is a very important, very critical milestone, and should be celebrated.
Yes, celebrated by all.
Yes.
Thank you, Alex. I appreciate everything you've done.
Oh, thanks.
I'm so glad to serve on the board with you.
Same here.
Thank you. You've been watching Legal Lines. Legal Lines is brought to you by the Massachusetts LGBTQ Bar Association. Our next live installment of Legal Lines will be December 21st, the third Wednesday of December. Our guest will be Cara Safrandini. She is the Executive Director of Mass Equality, to bring us up to date on what Mass Equality has been doing, and the transgender bill has been one of their priorities as well. And then on January 18th, again, the third Wednesday of January, Kathy Rubin will be our guest to talk about the impact of this transgender bill. Thank you very much for tuning in. See you next time.